Over the past year or so, I've done videos on the Shelby GT350R, the Dodge Charger Hellcat, and now it's time for another American masterpiece, the 6th generation Camaro ZL1 1LE. This is probably the most extreme Camaro ever made, and I'm gonna warn you right now, if you want some fluff video that's a giant advertisement for this car, look elsewhere, because we're gonna get pretty in depth on this. Let's take a look. Now this has to be talked about. Under this cover is the Camaro ZL1, and it's been supplied to me from Tri Industries, which is a local business, non-for-profit business in Northern Illinois. They've contacted me and said, hey, we have these cars and we have a mission to employ disabled veterans and people of disabilities. As a non-for-profit organization, Tri Industries has had to get extremely creative in how they generate revenue. So they're taking cool cars like this Camaro and creating a sweepstakes for it. So you can donate to potentially win it, and that donation is tax deductible. Now, the huge pro for me is I get access to a car that's not from a manufacturer, not from a private party or an owner. So I can be a little bit more thorough and a little less biased on the presentation. If you like seeing these videos, donate to their cause. They'll continue to buy these cars for this purpose. And for me, it really is about not only the car, it is about helping the people. So thank you for watching, and get ready for this pretty in-depth review. Now, I'm not gonna pound smoke up your rump. One of the first cars I ever bought was a Chevy Celebrity. That's right. And it was the first and last Chevy I ever owned. But thanks to that car, I learned how to work on automobiles. Go figure. Now, fast forward, taking a look at this Camaro. When this got dropped off to me, I was absolutely stunned at how aggressive and bold this car looked. It just looks badass. Now let's get on to the front end of the ZL1, specifically the 1LE package. Now you're gonna notice right away the Aero pieces, which I'll get into in a minute. But this matte hood, I absolutely loathe. And I loathe it because it's gonna be a pain in the ass to clean compared to the rest of the paintwork. And let's talk about the paintwork. I think most of the 6th generation Camaro owners already know this. The clear is extremely brittle. I would almost completely put a ceramic coating on here with a wrap immediately, which this car is gonna get, I'm pretty sure. It has a carbon fiber center hood extractor, which gives it this large bulge, which also helps to accommodate the space and give more breathing room for the supercharger that's sitting under there like an oven. One of the biggest things about the 1LE package, or the track pack, is its Aero setup. Now this is something you don't think about during street driving because you're not typically at triple-digit speeds all the time. But when you get out there on a circuit and you're pounding the car around, if you don't have the right Aero setup, either you don't have enough front downforce or rear downforce, when you start to get in those higher speed maneuvers, the car wants to walk or to push on you or to wash out. This setup is designed to help eliminate some of that by giving you more confidence. Let's talk about the individual pieces. Splitters, which is this whole piece here that's attached to the lower part of the bumper. Now on a race car, splitters are typically chassis mounted. They're mounted to the frame of the car, so they're extremely rigid where you can stand on them. This is not a race car, it's a street car. So when you push on it, you can tell there's a little bit of flex on here, but it's completely integrated into the bumper. It's as solid as you can possibly make it. It also extends out roughly about 3 inches from the front part of the bumper. And universally, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but whenever you look at splitters, you typically want them out at least 2 to 3 inches from the front part of the bumper to be functional. Also, height is a big deal. The closer to the ground, the more effective it becomes. Now, you typically don't want it higher than 3 inches to be effective. And this car is right about at that point. And the best part is, you can lower the front end of the car to make this more usable. The second part is the canards, or dive planes, whatever you want to call it. They're the same thing. So this is also designed to flow air into the coolers, flow air into the bumpers to move air through here, through the wheel area. their cooling system here is totally set up to pound this car around. Now the canards also flow air up and around the wheel because these new tires, these they're .R compound, you know, they come out a little bit from the fender, so it's going to create wind turbulence. So this canard sticks out just enough to flow air around them to direct the air vortex down the side of the car all the way to that rear wing. This is completely designed together, and that's why this is important. It's not a Nerf setup. This isn't some aftermarket where somebody just glued on this crap. It works. One of the reasons why this car snaps necks, specifically in the male demographic, is it looks brutish. It has this muscular shape to it. The way that the fenders bulge out, the way that the lines are, the way that the rocker panels kind of come out at you. And of course, this paint color looks amazing on here. Now, at least from a design standpoint, you have forged 19-inch wheels on this car, on the 1LE package. On the ZL1, without that, you get 20-inch forged wheels. So they brought the size down, which obviously reduces weight, and these feel really light. I expected when I pulled it off this car, I was gonna break my back, but they're extremely light. The front is a 305 width tire, the back is 325. I mean, it's got an amazing amount of meat on here for the type of driving you're gonna be doing. Now, when we get to the pooper of this Camaro, specifically with the 1LE package, you're gonna notice this. An unpainted carbon fiber wing, which Scott's gonna talk about in detail in the shop. It is functional, but it's gonna depend on who you are. I'm the type of guy who likes it painted, like I like my toenails painted. If I go out with just no coating on them, I feel nude. Now, let's talk about the trunk space, because this is kind of a big deal. When I pop this bad boy open, it's got uprated struts so that the wing doesn't affect the opening and closing of it. But this is where this car loses to the Mustang and to the Charger Hellcat. This trunk is so Nerf. If you're somebody that's going to the track, this might be a concern because you're probably not going to fit as many spares in here, or tires, and it's a consideration. Now, most people are probably going to use this, they're going to trailer this or have tires to trailer with it, so just note that. Take a look at it before you buy it. Let's take a look at the inside. When we get on the inside of the Camaro, well, you got to watch your feet because of this rocker panel, and I talk about this with other cars. It's very easy to scrape up. When you close the door, that's what I was talking about with sight lines. You can see how little glass there is here. I feel like I'm in an S&M dungeon. So it's something you have to get used to. Upon first impressions, namely with the 1LE package, and you have all this fluff in here. You have Alcantara on the steering wheel, the door panels, the dashboard. There's no carbon in here. There's no shiny bits. There's matte chrome. That is it. And this is such a nice change. Chevy is not trying to pander to the past here. They're trying to look forward. This is probably one of the better Chevy interiors from a sports car perspective ever made. Now, I'm going to say this. It does look very generic. I don't think this is going to age well, but I will take this over the Mustang, the current generation Mustang, and the Dodge Charger Hellcat or the Challenger Hellcat interior. This is so much better in every single way. Now, when you start talking about modern sports cars, one of the biggest things, or one of the biggest layers of competition between them, is seating design. And Chevy has chosen a Recaro seat in the ZL1 or the 1LE. They are covered in Alcantara. There is leather side bolstering, there's contrasting stitching, and these are extremely comfortable. And the best part about this interior is, unlike a lot of kind of these smaller sports cars like the Miata, where you can maybe fit 30% of the American public into it, this car has been designed to allow you to add on some blubber. Man, woman, ape, you're gonna fit in here extremely comfortable. Now, the only negative part about these seats is they really don't recline all that much. And I heard a C6 Corvette driver complain at the track how his helmet was always hitting the roof. And I think you're gonna kind of have some of the same problems here because you can't recline it any more than this. Now, the forward and aft setting is really good. I like it, but that's something you're gonna wanna check out before you sign on the dotted line. One of the biggest things that caught me by surprise with this new generation Camaro is the interior ergonomics, the knobs, buttons, and switches. Now, if you go back even 8 years ago in a Chevy product, it looks like preschoolers design most of their buttons. Not anymore, not in the 6th generation Camaro. All these buttons and knobs are very modern. The way that you change the cooling mode from hot to cold, you rotate this vent ring. It's just really neat and functional. You can see the temperature on a little digital display next to the ring. So you don't have to use the touchscreen. You don't have to use the infotainment here. And that's one of the biggest pros to this car. Now, the other thing about the Camaro interior, at least on this car, and yes, it's brand new, it feels extremely solid. It doesn't sound like a shit box or just a tin can, kind of like how the Mustang feels to me, especially when you get miles on it. Everything feels so well put together in here. Now, let's talk about the instrumentation. You have 2 analog gauges for speedo and tachometer. The center display is just a giant LCD screen that's completely kind of configurable. You can see the different gauges. You have oil pressure. You have oil temperature. You can look at your tire temperature here, your tire pressure, all the key components that you need to know from a high performance driving perspective are here. And one of the biggest things I loved was the tire temperature gauge, because I'm in a colder condition right now and I needed to know that. It really helps me to know, hey, when can I start to push it a little bit more rather than doing guesswork? Now it's time to fire up the engine to go over the driving modes. Now this car offers you 4 different driving modes: Tour, Sport, Track, and Snow and Ice. And it's all selectable through this physical switch right below your gear shifter. Now in Tour and Snow and Ice, the exhaust goes in stealth mode. When you switch to Sport or Track, it goes into loud mode. Now those who love V8s and exhaust tones, take a minute to fillet the sound clips here. Now, one of the nicest parts about this car is it allows you to change the exhaust modes and configure them in the infotainment screen. You go to the vehicle setup and you can turn off the ability to have the mode select change the exhaust tones. If you always want it loud, you can have it there. If you want it in stealth mode all the time, then you can do that. But GM recommends that you don't run stealth mode on the track. Likely it's due to hurting performance. All right, let me turn off this car and talk about the infotainment for a moment. And when you look at this, you think, well, the graphical design of it, the icons, the colors, it could use some polish. But I can totally forgive that because all the icons are the right size. It's pretty quick to get around for the most part. The touch scrolling is nothing like a tablet or a smartphone, but it is extremely usable for a car. I guess let me just put it that way. I like the way everything is easily accessible for the human finger. You don't have to be, you don't feel like you have to be a little mouse to tip tap on the screen. And because the HVAC controls are separated from it, it makes it a hell of a lot nicer to use. Now, they do allow you to customize the ambient lighting in here as well, which is a really nice feature of this interior. It's kind of tied to the drive modes by default. So if you go into Sport, it goes red. Or I'm sorry, if you go into Track, it goes red. Sport is like orange, whatever. And you can change it in here to whatever the hell you want. You can unbind that so you can go pink and purple or whatever your flavor is. But overall, getting through the menus is good. The audio system adjustment's good. It seems to connect to Bluetooth quickly. All of that works the way that you would expect it to work. And the last part is, yes, you can go in here, like I said, you can change your exhaust modes in here, and you have the high performance track recorder in this car. So you insert the SD card by your left knee. There's a little slot down there. You put it in there, and as long as you have the right formatted card in the right size, it will record your video clips, and they're pretty bad quality. The camera is up here in the rear view mirror area, and but it does give you sound, it does give you video, and it gives you an overlay based on where you're at or the track that you're at. And that's a huge pro for this if you just want to get in and drive fast. All right, since this was our first time covering the 6th gen Camaro, that was a lot, but let's head into the shop and talk with Turbowski about the nuts and bolts. Well, you're back. Mm-hmm. You've been on a hiatus.
Yeah, you finally got a real car. Chevy Cobalt SS, baby.
No, this is a Camaro. The 1LE ZL1.
Isn't it the ZL1 1LE?
Yes, it is.
They should have called it the Z650.
That's even more confusing. What do all these Z numbers stand for? The Z71 or whatever the fuck the packages are?
You ever look at a sticker inside of GM where it shows all the options? And sometimes we do an alignments, you got to look at, there's like they're 3 characters and there's a whole freaking sticker this big, and you gotta, okay, where is Z84? And it has like 3 different packages it has to have. It's like, are you kidding me? God.
You got to be a real Chevy fanboy to understand all of that. And I don't have the time for
I have
it.
a little cheat sheet.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, on my mobile.
Oh, do you have a lower back tattoo with all the Z70 or 70 packages?
Yeah.
This car is beastly. So let's start with the architecture of the platform. This is on GM's Alpha architecture. Now they're already in development of the Alpha 2.
So is that only in the 2018?
The
how long?
6th gen Camaro.
Oh, it's I mean, I don't
As
pay
soon as-
attention anymore. So.
Okay. Yeah, the ZL1, the regular Camaro, they're all on the Alpha architecture. And it started in 2012 or thereabouts with the CTS and the ATS Cadillac. And both those vehicles, especially the CTS V, are insanely capable cars. Now, most people don't. It's
Give
like
them any credit?
Don't give them any credit, and a lot of it has to do with the branding, the styling. It's like Buick. It doesn't matter what you do, people just don't.
Well,
don't
you
take
got
it
to
serious.
admit those Cadillacs are, I mean, they're cool in a way, but they're ridiculous looking.
Right. But let's talk about the front. The front of this car features, well, really the whole car features 11 heat exchangers or coolers. So the big thing when you deal with all these coolers, and we talk about this more with aftermarket cars and even high performance cars, and you've seen this with the GT350, you've seen it with the Hellcat, leaky oil cooler lines. You get more cooler lines, more inspection.
Yep.
And if you're tracking this car, this is a reality of something like this. This is amazing that they did it because you can go out and pound around, but you have to do your due diligence. You're not just going to go 160 miles an hour on a track or go blowing around and then just feel like, oh, everything's going to be fine. You should inspect this stuff. So as we get to the middle part of the car, Scott, before we start dipping into the suspension and brakes, the middle section here is not covered up. A lot of cars are starting to cover this up for airflow, but they need to leave this open primarily for heat. The transmission has heat cooling vanes on it to cool this. The oil pan has airflow over it. And one of the main things to talk about is this Tremec TR6060 transmission. And it's shared with other GM cars, but it's uprated here for the additional torque. And when I got in this car, I've heard that it was the same transmission that's in the Shelby GT350. When I got in it, it feels identical to that car, but it's not the same. The Shelby uses a TR3160, which is a much lower torque rating, and Ford has just gutted the thing and just rebuilt it with different internals. This is an uprated transmission. It still has amazing shifter feel. I think it's a really good transmission for this car. And the best part about it is there is no hesitation, no gear grinding, no weirdness in it. It always goes into gear, and I mean, you can pound it. We're going to talk more about this differential, the ELSD.
Oh.
Yeah. And at first I thought, well, is this just another one of those fancy names like Toyota calls it, where it's just braking the wheel or the tire based on the stability control? And that's not the case. This is an electronic locking differential with asymmetrical half shafts. One is thicker than the other, and we saw this on the Hellcat, and we were kind of wondering why, and it's to prevent wheel hopping.
This one's massive.
Yeah. And this does not have a lot of like strangeness in the rear end. I mean, yes, it skates, but it's not like, out of control, and it does prevent a lot of wheel hop with this design. Now, the thing is with the ELSD is it's not a torque vectoring differential, and I thought maybe that's what it was doing, but it's not. So you have here, you have an ECU for this differential, and then a pump that pumps hydraulic fluid. It's a hydraulic actuated clutch system in here. And when you're off the throttle, the ECU is constantly looking at yaw rate, G-force data, vehicle position, throttle position, everything that you're doing with the car so it can be preemptive. When you're off the throttle, both wheels can spin at their own speed. When you're on the throttle, like in a corner, it's knowing what to do. It can gradually slip the clutches and push fluid to it to lock the clutches up so power can go to both wheels. It's heavier, but it's extremely durable because it's not complicated. It's just, hey, I'm going to unlock some clutches with some fluid. But the second thing that they do, because there's going to be a lot of heat generated from this system, especially with those clutches slipping, they have to run coolant to this. And the coolant system is separate from the oil, so it's a totally separate channel. They don't mix unless, of course, you damage seals or something where it pisses together. But you shouldn't have any problem with differential cooling here. Everything's been uprated here from like a standard Camaro. And this was originally kind of started on the Corvette. I believe this is standard on like a Corvette. That's the way their differentials work. The Aero. Tell me about the wing.
The wing is designed by Pratt & Miller, or co-designed by Pratt & Miller.
Why would they do that?
Because they know how to build race cars.
And what do they build?
The Camaro, what is it? The Camaro GT4 and the Corvette race cars. Some pretty intense cars.
Yeah, they are. They're pretty serious cars.
Yeah, I know. When I was doing the World Challenge stuff, the ALMS cars, man, when those yellow Corvettes were out there, it's like freaking thunder going around.
The next thing to talk about in the rear is the suspension. You have an aluminum carrier, an aluminum hub, but everything else is stamped steel. You have stamped steel lower control arms, upper control arms, toe links, and a subframe carrier that is steel as well. And
It's got your dream.
what's that?
It's full alignment capabilities in the rear.
And and the alignment capability is very eccentric adjusters on the back. So doing your alignments in the back on a rack will be easier in the back for sure.
Oh, I mean, they're freaking right here. Bam, done.
Done. Yeah. So on a car like this, it's extremely important that you have that. I mean, otherwise it just becomes Nerf. So it is here in the back.
And it also has something else. We're probably going to get to that, but
You're talking about the dampers?
no.
What?
The sway bar.
Yes.
An adjustable sway bar.
And how many positions?
3.
Okay.
So not a whole lot, but
It's not a whole lot, and I think the adjustment range, it's set in the middle by default. And you can go stiffer or softer, obviously, one hole down. One hole up goes 15% stiffer, one hole down goes 10% softer. So it's just a subtle tweak based on your driving habits. If you like a little bit more oversteer, you can go firmer. If you don't like the rear end walking, you can go softer.
I don't think you need that with this car. You got your right foot for that.
You're right. Yep, that's all it is. Let's take a look at the front.
Oh, let's go take a look at your toilet.
The entire front half of this car, from the subframe is aluminum, to the bracing's aluminum, to the lower control arms, the hub, the
Even
knuckle.
looks like the motor mounts are aluminum.
The motor mounts are aluminum, and even the strut bodies are aluminum, including the top hats. And this is where a lot of the development of this platformer architecture, they were trying to save weight, namely over the previous generations of the cars. And in terms of the suspension, this does not look Nerf at all. And a lot of it has to do, well, of course, when you see these brakes on here, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, which we'll get into. But the strut assembly is manufactured by Multmatic. And a lot of people talk about this. You see videos, you see articles about, oh, it's got a Multmatic spool valve damper. Well, what the hell is that? So basically, I'm going to explain this as simple as possible. First and foremost, most dampers or shocks use shims to allow oil flow. And they can stack shims at various different sizes, heights, to get that oil to flow. And all dampers are as a glorified valve. It's a valve to move oil. There's a piston that moves through the shock, moves oil up and around for compression and rebound. These Multmatic shocks were designed for all the race cars. They use it in Spec Miata now. Race teams from Daytona prototypes that you love, Formula One, the Red Bull racing team that won all the championships with Sebastian Vettel had those Multmatic spool valve dampers that we saw at Öhlins, the same style. They make all of this, and now they have a damper set up for this car. And they do not sell to the aftermarket. You can't buy this. You can't buy a Multmatic damper for like a street car. So this is kind of rare for a street car. They do make some exotic dampers.
Yeah, I thought certain cars had them.
Like Aston Martin has one. There's certain like higher end vehicles that use them. But why it's special is it uses a spring. It uses a spring inside the valve. So it's a linear response. So when there's pressure down on the piston, that spring will load and unload at a linear rate. It's always constant. With shims, they can deflect, they can change. So oil flow can change based on the wear of the shock. With the springs, it will compress to a certain point, and then the oil will flow. So it's almost got like a preload on it, or you can preload them before the oil flows through those passages. The next thing that it can do is manufacturers like GM, when they say, I want this valving, they can laser etch into the housing of the spool valve really easily what they want their valving, or that window. When that spring compresses, they can change all that oil flow by how they've laser etched the size. So it's super easy to program, or not even program, just mechanically design these dampers. Whereas the magnetic system, all software control. It takes way too much work to get it set up. Where this is mechanical, it's not tied to drive modes. If you have a problem with these shocks, You can swap them out. It doesn't not connected to a computer. You can change the springs on here, which that's another thing to talk about. The springs are a 2.5 inner diameter, which is a really common spring size for aftermarket springs. And you look at these fancy $4,000 dampers, and they have Mexican-made coil springs on here. So this car might benefit if you can find out what the spring rates are to do like a Swift spring or an Eibach or whatever spring manufacturer you like. You might get a higher quality spring and even get a better ride control and quality out of these. So I know that's a long discussion about it, but this is a huge part of why this car handles so well. Now, while we're on the topic of the front suspension, one of the big things to discuss here is the fact that they've allowed you some camber adjustment from the factory. Now, these are struts, and like traditional strut suspensions, the strut has to do load bearing. So when it's mounted to the upright here, you can't really move the wheel in and out for camber adjustment. Yeah, you can slot the holes or screw around with the strut bolts to kind of shim. With this, the top hat, it's a solid aluminum piece. There's no rubber bushing, so that's why it's more of a track type suspension. What they allow you to do is you have height adjustment here that you can drop it about 10 millimeters total, which is really about a half inch, and it's set in the middle position, so there's not a lot that you can get out of it, but most of the height adjustment is here to lower the front splitter to get more aero effect. That's mostly what you're gonna do. The rear height is not adjustable, so corner balancing is gonna be a crapshoot, and we'll get it on the scales and see what the crosswind is. I mean, if you have height adjustability, I understand why they didn't have the rear adjustable, because they didn't want to screw up the geometry with the toe and all that. But if you're gonna have the front, if the ability to raise and lower the front, you should have the back adjustable even a little bit to get the cross balance set up. So, but we'll see how bad it is on the scales. Now, adjusting the camber is a little bit different. You have to remove the guide pin that's in there from the factory, and the guide pin is there in a lot of strut cars. So during the assembly process, they raise it and the pin just goes into the hole without having to position it. It's a guide pin. You can remove the guide pin with an Allen bolt and remove it. It doesn't do anything other than the guide. Once you have that pin removed, you unbolt the two strut bolts at the top, drop this down. You actually have to drop the strut down, and then there is just a thread, not a threaded, but it's welded in place, and you can turn it with a wrench to rotate the whole upper hat assembly, and when you rotate it, you'll see it's a track position. You bolt it down, tighten it down, and it's supposed to give you somewhere around 2.7 degrees of negative camber for the track. I think most people are going to set that position to track and leave it there because you're going to have to drop this down.
Are you really worried about tire wear with these tires?
True. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to care. So probably leave it in track position, get your alignment done, and be done with it. If you can get ride height set too, great, but I don't think too many people are going to mess around with that. The last thing to talk about, take a look at that. That is...
I mean, look at that.
It is f***ing ridiculous. It's amazing. And
it's huge.
It is ridiculously big. This is a almost 5-point-inch rotor.
Right, so
15.5-inch rotor.
Yeah, but usually when you have big rotors, the face is so small.
Right.
But this thing, I mean, it's ridiculous. And it's not carbon ceramic, which I am extremely impressed by.
I agree with you.
No holes, no slots, no
bullshit. All surface area to make use of. And this steel rotor is two-piece, so you have an aluminum hat for heat dissipation, which helps, and you have a monoblock 6-piston Brembo caliper in the front that is specifically designed for these cars, the ZL1s. The back is a 4-piston caliper. It's fixed, but these brakes, and I'm going to say this when I'm driving, they're crazy. They really are crazy for being a steel setup. This shows you how much you can do with a steel setup on a car. You don't need to go to some exotic materials.
It's point proven. I mean, yeah. I think this car is plenty capable to show you don't need carbon brakes.
Absolutely.
I mean,
it's a heavier car. It has no problem with brake fade, and a lot of that is design, obviously heat dissipation. You have brake ducts on both sides of the car that flow into these air directors, which have kick-ups to move right onto the disc itself. And this car specifically does not have dust shields on the back of the rotors. Now, the manual says for if you're an SS owner and you have dust shields, you want to remove that and the front wheel spats to aid in cooling, and you want to put them back on when you're done. This doesn't even have them. You don't even have the problem with the dust shields to trap heat in here. The only dust shield you have, which is more of a probably a heat deflector, is for the lower ball joint to separate the heat from the brake.
Yes, so you don't melt.
Yeah. Yep. Now that we're under the hood, Scott, we're not going to cover this as much as the rest of the car, and that is because this engine has been recycled out of the Chevrolet Corvette Z06, the same supercharged 6.2 liter, making 650 pounds of torques and 650 horsepower. It is ridiculous. Titanium intake valves, forged aluminum pistons, the works. Now, the only difference here from that motor is the fact that it does not have dry sump lubrication. It has a baffled oil pan, and they couldn't carry that over from the Corvette because of packaging. Now, the only other thing really to note under the hood is this, the rain deflector. You want to take this off if you're going on the track, assuming there's no rain. If you're on a dry climate, you remove this, you're going to get a lot more heat dissipation, and the GM recommends you remove it. The next thing that you want to do is, if you're running this on the track, they recommend you switch the oil out to a heavier oil or thicker oil, 15W50 for track use. And you're only supposed to run that for 4 hours. Once you run for 4 hours, they want you to change it out. It probably has to do with, lubrication properties, heat, whatever, just to be safe. When you're done with the track, they want you to go back to the factory oil. And that just goes back to conversations I've had before about oil pressures and oil temperatures. You want to run a thicker oil if you're running the car hot and heavy for a long time. It just makes sense. I'm glad they put it in there. A lot of car companies don't even give you that information. Inside the ZL1 1LE, aside from having to check my blind spots a lot, this thing is a beast. It is just absolutely ridiculous, and yes, it is a track weapon. Driving it on the street is an exercise in patience. And also an exercise in the ability to restrain yourself. Now, there's going to be a lot made about choosing the ZL1 with magnetic dampers or the 1LE with the spool valve dampers. And I think if you're somebody that's already been through a lot of track cars, you're going to know what you're in for with a suspension like this. With aluminum top hats, spherical bearings, you're going to know right off the bat that it's going to be kind of a knocky ride. You're going to hear clunks, knocks all the time, and it's extremely firm. But you don't get the sense of bounciness in here. It just feels really well controlled. It just makes a lot of noise. The other part of this car that's interesting is these track day tires. They are a .R compound, and I did a video about why running a street car with ridiculous tires on the road are a recipe for disaster if you care about your paint and other things. The second thing about these tires is they take forever to heat up. On a day like today, where now the temperatures are in the low 50s, you're just not going to get heat in them. And it's something you have to prepare yourself for if you're going to buy the 1LE and you're going to drive it on the street. You're almost stuck driving in warm temperatures or warm climates, or you're going to have yourself an extra set of tires for the street, which, at this price range, it's probably a good idea anyway, because you've got 100 treadwear tires on here. They're just not going to last. But it's just, again, it's something to be aware of. These are not designed to be street driven. Now, this car has an auto rev matching feature, which you pull a paddle to turn it on and you pull a paddle to turn it off. I don't use them, but it works extremely well. And it's something that if you're kind of new to the track scene, you have issues with heel to toe downshifting, it's going to help you a lot. But heel to toe downshifting is so easy on this car that it becomes a non-issue. The brakes, you know, this is a car that you're gonna have to bed the brakes. Oh my God. This is what I'm talking about with ultra sticky tires. It's just, you feel so bad for the car, but the brakes, you actually have to bed them. These are brakes that you're gonna have to bed right out of the box to make sure you're getting the ultimate, you know, bite. But once you do, I mean, they're ridiculous. Man, this thing is just so fast. Man, it just exceeds what's really necessary for the street. And I think a lot of it is you have the torque here that a lot of cars don't have, like the Shelby GT350R, amazing car, but not a lot of torque. This gives you that sensation of being thrown back into your seat, kind of like the Hellcat. When you come flying into a turn, you can go really deep on the brakes, really deep, and you feel the G-force in your head. It's pretty crazy that you can feel the G-force from the braking. A lot of cars, you know, you get a sense of braking, but this, you start to get lightheaded when you get really hard on the brakes, and that's something I haven't experienced in a lot of street cars. Really doing their job in the bumpy sections of pavement, and that's also what the Aero's there to help you with, to suck the car down at higher speeds where you need it. These dampers do an extremely good job of doing keeping the car on the ground. Even the ups and downs where you typically get this bounciness, the rebound, the compression stroke is really good on bad pavement. And the point is, if you get on a track that's not perfect, like tracks like Sebring or you know, some of these club tracks that don't spend a lot of money for upkeep, you're not going to be too disappointed in terms of ride quality. It strikes a really good balance. And I think a lot of the media is bagging on this car for its stiff ride. But this is a track car. I've been in cars that are set up worse than this, and people that do aftermarket suspensions that are just a nightmare. This is nothing like that. You can drive on the street with this. You just have to be prepared for the type of suspension it is. Absolute beast. Now the negative attributes, well, it's also one of its positive ones. It's so fast that it's just almost unusable on the street. And I feel like you have to be somebody that is going to be able to keep themselves in check to drive this responsibly. And I think that's one of the big boner kills about it is, yeah, you can look at lap times, you can look at how capable it is, but let's be honest, this is way too much for a street car. And I think we've gotten to that point. The Hellcat was the same way. It was ridiculous on a straight line. It didn't have the cornering ability that this does, but this has everything, and you literally could get yourself killed in this car. I feel like the GT350R or the GT350 is a kind of a more softer version of this car, where it's still crazy, but it just doesn't feel as bonkers as this. But if you're somebody like that, you've come out of race cars, you've come out of high horsepower cars with a ton of torque, you're gonna love it. And I think that's the biggest thing. Let's get to the conclusion and see the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the Camaro ZL1 1LE. If you've made it this far, hopefully you've learned something, because I know I have, spending all this time with this vehicle. Now here it is. If you're going to compare it to the competition like the Shelby GT350R or the Charger or Challenger Hellcat, this is the far superior car front to rear, and a lot of it has to do with its chassis. It's just more advanced, it's newer. The use of aluminum, the use of stiffening and subframe pieces and all the suspension components, all of that is far more advanced in terms of body structure. The next thing you're going to look at is its overall design, its interior design, exterior design. That is pretty subjective, but you can definitely tell there's a lot of quality here, namely in the interior compared to the Mustang. The Mustang just looks ancient compared to this car. And in terms of the Hellcat, the Charger and Challenger, you know that body structure and chassis and architecture has been reworked for the past like 15 years. It is so ancient. So does that translate into a better driving experience? The brakes are incredible here. And when you get to this level, it's like, how do you argue it anyway? All three of those cars have great brakes. The ZL1 is amazing. The steering is, you know, it's pretty average for this segment. It's pretty heavy because of the tires that are on there. It's not going to blow you away in terms of steering feel. The transmission is amazing. The engine performance, assuming that it's going to be reliable, is remarkable. So what the hell's wrong with it? I mean, when you look at the price of this vehicle for what you get, I mean, this competes with supercars, and it's not even a question of it. Nobody's going to argue that. I mean, it's mostly little things that are wrong. Visibility sucks, and you trade off the looks for that. The paint quality's average at best. There's a ton of orange peel. Well, look at the price point. Pretty much every con with this car, you can counter with it. And I think the biggest con overall is the fact that this car is so overkill, even for those that are planning to track it. You know, me and Scott got out of this thing and we thought, this thing needs almost a roll cage. If you're gonna go to the track with this, I literally would not feel safe without caging it. I mean, that is how competent it is. You're pushing that bleeding edge between a street car and a race car. And this is not a race car, don't get me wrong, but it's almost crossing that line as a street car. It's so overcapable and so overkill for anybody on normal roads that I almost don't get it. Now, if you're somebody that really wants this, you might argue, well, why don't you just get a Corvette? Well, this is gonna really destroy a Corvette, and you look at the price, there's no question about it, namely the cooling. Hopefully the reliability is there, and it has just this street presence. So it's a huge pro. And I think somebody's gonna finally ask, well, which car would I take? And I think for me, if I had to choose between the ZL1 1LE, the GT350R, and a Hellcat, that's a tough choice because each car is for a different type of person. As a cruiser, I'd take a Hellcat all day. For a straight up track car, I'd take the 1LE. But I would have to say, I would take, as much as it's not as good as this car, I'd still take the GT350R because it does give you a fun element of street driving while also being an extremely fun track car. So that's my personal opinion, but you really can't lose with this car. And I think, you know, if you're kind of teetering between the ZL1 and the 1LE package, I would just go for the 1LE package because you're getting the superior damper technology, you're getting the aerodynamics, and yes, it costs a little bit more, but I think it's also going to have better resale value as well because of all of that. So that's it. We're going to have a supplemental video. You're going to see a link here or below. It may not be out yet, but when it is, you'll see that link pop up. Check it out. Scott's drive, all the footage that we cut. And also, if you want this car, if you want to donate to Tri Industries, please do so. The link's below to donate to possibly win this car and then help support their cause. It will keep the cars coming. And hopefully this video has been informational. Thank you so much for your time. See you later.